The problem, though, for DeSantis is it sort of emulates what Texas Senator Ted Cruz did in 2015, 2016.
Right.
And it worked for Cruz in Iowa. He won. He beat Trump. But the problem is that he then lost, trounced. He got trounced by Trump in New Hampshire.
Right.
And so whether the DeSantis team can avoid that.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by White House reporter Naomi Lim. Naomi, the president's met with a very important ally. What did the President Biden and the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, what did they focus on in their meeting?
You're right. Biden sat down again, the fourth time this year, with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. It was kind of interesting watching both the leaders sort of play to their different audiences. I think Rishi Sunak is coming under a lot of pressure because they haven't been able to negotiate a free trade agreement or a trade agreement with the US after Britain left the EU. But what he got instead today, or like when they met, was a sort of a compromise, an economic cooperation plan where the two countries sort of discuss, their strategic cooperation over things like critical minerals, as well as emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, which is something that Rishi Sunak really wants the UK to take a lead on. And then obviously they were speaking about Russia and Ukraine. We're seeing the United Kingdom sort of push the US forward in terms of providing things that potentially the Biden administration didn't want to provide.
Right, they've often been a step or half a step ahead.
Yeah. So one example is the F-16 international coalition that both Rishi Sunak and his counterparts in, I think it was the Netherlands, sort of worked towards. And then he sort of said last week, Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO. So it's sort of seeing that come about just as Ukraine, we're seeing signs that they're about to embark on their highly anticipated counter-offensive.
So talk a little bit about the 2024 campaign for the Republican presidential nomination, the people trying to run against President Biden. And you've written a story about the way Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has tried to position himself vis-a-vis former President Donald Trump.
I know, I feel like stuff just got real this past week with lots of candidates finally sort of putting their hat in the ring. The field is now expanded to 10. But at the same time, we're still seeing one clear frontrunner being former President Donald Trump, and then someone that's running still an average of 30 percentage points behind him, and that being Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. We're sort of seeing referring to him as his first name.
You're on a first name basis, that's right.
DeSantis sort of run to the right.
Everybody in Iowa is kind of on a first name basis.
Exactly. They're sort of seeing, we're sort of seeing the governor run to the right of the former president, particularly in Iowa, where the Republican primary voters, at least are more conservative than, let's say, the New Hampshire primary, and then to a lesser...
more evangelical.
Exactly. So we're sort of seeing, what I sort of put to the campaign is him running to the right. They sort of push back, saying, well, actually, potentially, the former president has moved to the left. And the campaign sort of cites things like criticizing DeSantis's handling of COVID-19 and instead elevating former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Right.
That's something that DeSantis has taken very, very personally.
Sure.
And another example, for example, is immigration, sort of the Trump campaign criticizing DeSantis for purportedly supporting amnesty and things like that. And the problem, though, for DeSantis is it sort of emulates what Texas Senator Ted Cruz did in 2015, 2016.
Right.
And it worked for Cruz in Iowa. He won. He beat Trump. But the problem is that he then lost, trounced. He got trounced by Trump in New Hampshire.
Right.
And so whether the DeSantis team can avoid that is something that remains to be seen. But we're sort of seeing the DeSantis Iowa ground game sort of reflect Cruz's and in the most basic term, like they've got the similar aids. So we'll see how they kind of adjust their strategies with that in mind so that history doesn't repeat itself.
So everybody in the field now is sort of trying to dance around about how they have to handle Trump. And one of the more interesting cases, in addition to DeSantis, who's the runner-up in most polls, but one of the more interesting cases is former Vice President Mike Pence. What is the dilemma for Pence, do you think?
It's really interesting for Mike Pence because he wants to run on his record as vice president, but he also wants to distinguish himself.
And who is he vice president under?
Under Trump,
Ah.
yeah, his number one rival. But he also wants to distance himself, particularly after January 6th. And it's just a very tricky needle for him to thread. I think what we've seen through his announcement speeches and different videos and different campaign events is that he's sort of saying, you know what, I wasn't just vice president, I was also Indiana's governor, I was also a congressman, I have this other more broader record that I can run on. It's just that everyone remembers, hang Mike Pence, the rioters around January 6th. And so I think that sort of really complicates matters for him. He thinks that he can sort of, that it was even sort of seen this, with this announcement where he sort of said, no one who asks someone to choose between themselves and the Constitution should be president ever again, and then had to sort of say when he was asked about the Republican National Committee's pledge of sort of support, allegiance, whatever you want to call it, to participate in the debates, he had to sort of say, well, if Trump is the nominee, I will support him. So it's just going to be this tightrope that,
he shouldn't be president again, but if he's a nominee, he can be.
Exactly. So I think this is a tightrope that we're seeing lots of the Republicans sort of grapple with, and I think it's just sort of what we've seen for the past almost decade in terms of how Republicans have to deal with Trump.
Walking that tightrope, but without a net.
Exactly.
Thank you, Naomi. You can read Naomi and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.